Hello and welcome back to our Kinetic Platform training videos. My name is Derick Larson from Support and Training, and in this video we'd like to talk about one of the system controls we missed on the 100 level of classes, and that is looping. So just as an introduction, looping is a way to repetitively perform nodes in your tree. One thing I wanted to mention first off is that one thing looping is not is it's not like a traditional loop structure from programming. You don't loop until something. We do looping a number of times depending upon the input to the tree and a path that looks at that input and decides up front before any looping happens how many times the loop is going to happen. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit more, and there's also a bit more about that in the accompanying article. So the first thing I want to do is take a look at a loop. I have a couple of them constructed here. So I'm in my space and global workflow, and we'll open this up in the builder. All right, so every loop has at least three parts. So we're going to have a loop head, which is the beginning of it, which is probably the most important piece of a loop. The loop tail, which identifies the end of the loop, so anything that's processed in the middle of it, that's the third part. And in mine, I have a very simple example. All of the nodes that are part of the loop are the third part of that. Whenever you're creating a loop, you want to create first the loop head and then the loop tail. You'll see this unique connector that's between the two. So now the head and the tail know where the rest of the loop is and not to process anything outside of that multiple times. And from there, in essence, you can put just about whatever you would like to into a loop. You could put a routine in there. I just have a basic echo node in mine. So let's talk about the loop head first. A loop head has three different pieces of information that it needs. The first is going to be the data source. Now this is the data that's coming into the loop that's going to define how many times and what data is processed with each iteration of that loop. We have two different ways the data source can be constructed. You can have either XML. In that case, we'll take a look at the second piece of information here. This is the loop path. So this gives you the structure down to whatever set of items are going to define that. If you take a look at the article, you can see the input for this one is going to be a kind of a three-child XML document. And so that's how this defines it. The last piece of information here is not actually used anymore by most of our consultants. A variable name, it would be used to define what that piece of information is that's going to be operated in within the loop. Right now, most folks that are using loops use something, just the result of the loop head. So I just want to show you that real quickly. So here, this is just an echo node. And it's going to get the results of loop head and whatever that value is. And so every time the loop iterates, this value is going to be different. So I think I want to show you a better example of the input just with the JSON piece that we have. This is a little bit newer in the newer versions of able to process JSON and XML. So here is just a static set of JSON that I created that has a make and model for different varieties of cars. So this very simple JSON object that's here. And then if we take a look at our loop head, it's going to be getting the result of this node. And this is the loop path. It uses a JSON path. There's a link to the documentation in the article that accompanies this video. So in this case with model, I would be looking at each one. I would run 4 times, and the first time I would use a value of pilot, then CRV, then explorer, then edge. So I'd have 4 iterations of this loop, and each one would have a different value to it. So that's really where a loop is different than a traditional programming structure. You don't do a count up to say, hey, stop looping if n is greater than 3, that kind of thing. And then once again, I just have the same node that's being processed within the loop with just a result of the value. So the last piece here of a loop is the loop tail. So I always like to think of a loop tail as a join. So what it's really doing is it's saying, okay, I'm looking at all of the iterations of this loop, and I need to know when I should exit or complete myself and head down to the next node in my tree. And so just like a join, we have three options. You can say, okay, I want to process every single loop iteration before I leave the loop, or I can say, okay, maybe I have a deferred node or a deferred routine in there, and as soon as somebody processes that completely, I'm going to exit out and go to my JSON complete node down here. Or I can say, you know, sum, and then I need to give it whatever that value is. I guess by far and away the most common thing I see is an all, because I want to do all of the processing that's in here and then head out of the loop. The only time that that can be an issue for you is if you have a bunch of deferred actions within your loop. It might take a while to process for that. So the last thing I'd like to talk about here to show you with a loop is to take a look at a loop run, because they're somewhat unique. Since I only have really, you know, one loop head, one loop tail, and one node inside my tree, but if I have 4 iterations, I'm going to have 4 copies of these in essence. So if we go back and take a look at a run, here I should have one I performed a few minutes ago. Let's see here. Sorry, I should have had this one all teed up for you. Here we go. So here's one that was set off an hour ago. And if I scroll down to my JSON, so here's my loop head and my loop tail. So as soon as the tree encounters a loop head, it tries to find the loop tail. And inside the loop head, you can see, okay, here's all the data, the 4 times I'm going to run through it. And then what you get is sort of an array. So for each time through the loop, we create a trigger to fire the loop head node. And since we're going to be doing essentially that same thing 4 times, we set it up sort of as an array with an iteration count here. And then you can see a corresponding output, or any of the nodes within that loop that are going to fire. You're going to see have a matching iteration or array count. One thing I always caution people is don't expect your loop to fire in the same order every time, so you can't really construct your loop and then count on going, you know, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The triggers can process at various times, and so you might have 0, 2, 1, 3. And so be careful with that. All right, well, that's about all we have for loops with this, and that's going to do it for all of our level 200 articles and videos. So thank you very much if you've made it all the way through watching. If you have any other questions, please take a look at the article or general information about loops or anything else really out on community.kineticdata.com. Thank you.